Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in this rich body of work we called Torah, only to find out that we are both characters within the story and to find out that the story is within us as characters and that we are also co-creators of the next chapters of this wonderful saga. We are in Parshat Noach, which begins in chapter 6 of the book of Genesis with verse 9. We will read through our English translation. I'll share with you a bit of focused study, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative conversation. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, together we can recite the blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of this moment of being together. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 9. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll offer the opportunity to everyone else to have a chance to read. This is the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. Noah walked with God. Noah begot 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Kath, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 11?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make it an ark with compartments, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, its width 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make an opening for the daylight in the ark and terminate it within a cubit of the top. Put the entrance to the ark in its side. Make it with bottom, second, and third decks.
Thank you. Let me write. Richard, would you like to read there at verse 17?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. For my part, I'm about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is a breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. And all that lives of all flesh, you shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take of everything that is eaten and stored away to serve as food for you and for them. Noah did so, just as God commanded him, so he did.
Thank you. Sherry, would you like to read a little bit starting at the beginning of chapter 7?
Thank you. Then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark with all of your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean animal you shall take 7 pairs, males and their mates, and of every animal that is not clean, 2, a male and its mate, and of the birds of the sky also, 7 pairs, male and female, to keep seed alive upon all the earth. For in 7 days' time I will make it rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And I will blot out from the earth all existence that I created. And Noah did just as the Lord commanded him.
Thank you. Steve, do you want to read a little bit at verse 6 of chapter 7?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi.
This is we have another Steve here.
Oh, the other Steve, you okay? Sorry.
Thank you.
Noah was 600 years old when the flood came, waters upon the earth. Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark
because of the waters of the flood. Of the clean animals, of the animals that are not clean, of the birds, and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 of each, male and female, came to Noah into the ark, as God had commanded Noah. And on the 7th day, the waters of the flood came upon the earth.
Thank you, Steve. Hannah, do you want to read a little bit at verse 11?
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep broke out, and the sky's floodgates opened. Rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and nights.
Go ahead.
That very day, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, Noah's sons came to the ark with Noah's wife and his sons, 3 wives. They and every type of animal, every type of beast, every type of creature that creeps on the earth, every type of fowl, every bird, every winged creature, they came to Noah, to the ark, 2 by 2, all flesh that had in it the breath of life. Those who came were male and female. Some of every species entered, just as God had ordered him. Then Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh shut the door after him.
Thank you. And now, Dave Leb, would you like to read starting at verse 17?
Okay. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and the waters increased and raised the ark so that it rose above the earth. The waters swelled and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark drifted upon the waters. When the waters had swelled much more upon the earth, all the highest mountains everywhere under the sky were covered. 15 cubits higher than did the waters swell as the mountains were covered. And all flesh that stirred on the earth perished, birds, cattle, beasts, and all the things that swarmed upon the earth, and all humankind. All in whose nostrils was the merest breath of life. All that was on dry land died. All existence on earth was blotted out. Humans, cattle, creeping things, and birds of the sky. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noach was left, and those with him in the ark.
Thank you, Dave. And would you like to read Mark Thompson at verse 24 and then continue into chapter 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. Sorry, I'm trying to find verse 24 here. And when the waters had swelled on the earth 150 days, God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused a wind to blow across the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were stopped up, and the rain from the sky was held back. The waters then receded steadily from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters diminished, so that in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. The waters went on diminishing until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the 1st of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible.
Thank you, Mark. And June, would you like to read at verse 6 of chapter 8?
At the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made and sent out the raven. It went to and fro until the waters had dried up from the earth. Then he sent out the dove to see whether the waters had decreased from the surface of the ground. But the dove could not find a resting place for its foot, and returned to him to the ark, for there was water all over all the earth. So putting out his hand, he took it into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days and again sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came back to him toward evening, and there in its bill was a plucked off olive leaf. Then Noah knew that the waters had decreased on the earth. He waited still another 7 days and sent the dove forth, and it did not return to him any more.
Thank you, June. Let me invite Steve Breton, if you'd like to read at verse 13 of chapter 8.
Thank you again, Rabbi. In the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the waters began to dry from the earth. And when Noah removed the covering of the ark, he saw that the surface of the ground was drying. And in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. God spoke to Noah, saying, "Come out of the ark, together with your wife, your sons, and your sons' wives. Bring out with you every living thing of all flesh that is with you, birds, animals, and everything that creeps on the earth, and let them swarm on the earth and be fertile and increase on the earth." So Noah came out together with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives. Every animal, every creeping thing, and every bird, everything that stirs on earth came out from the ark by families. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and taking of every clean animal and of every clean bird, he offered burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the pleasing odor, and the Lord said to himself, "Never again will I doom the earth because of man, since the devisings of man's mind are evil from his youth, nor will I ever again destroy every living thing as I have done. So long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease."
Thank you, Steve. And Jim, would you like to read at the start of chapter 9?
Thank you, Rabbi. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, "Be fertile and increase and fill the earth. The fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses. I give you all these. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it, but for your own lifeblood. I will require a reckoning. I will require it of every beast, of man too. Will I require a reckoning for human life, of every man for that of his fellow man.
Thank you so
Whoever
much.
sheds the
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Whoever-
Jim.
Okay.
Let me invite, thank you so much. Let me invite Paul to begin reading it at verse 6. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Rabbi. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God he made man. And you be fruitful and multiply, teem on the earth and multiply on it. And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, "And as for me, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your offspring after you, and with every living being that is with you, with the birds, with the animals, and with every beast of the land with you. All that departed the ark, to every beast of the land. And I will confirm my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant, and I give between me and you and every living being that is with you to generations forever. I have set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And it shall happen when I place the cloud over the earth, and the bow will be seen in the cloud. I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living being among all flesh. And the water shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud. And I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living being among all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is a sign of the covenant and I have confirmed between me and all flesh that is upon the earth.
Thank you, Paul. And Robin, would you like to read beginning at verse 18 of chapter 9?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Noah's sons who went out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham, he was the father of Canaan. These three were Noah's sons. From these, the whole earth was populated. Noah, a man of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and grew drunk and exposed himself under his tent. Ham, Canaan's father, saw his father's nakedness and outside told his two brothers. Shem and Japheth took a cloak and put it upon their shoulders. They walked backward and covered their father's nakedness. Facing backward, they did not see their father's nakedness. Noah awakened from his wine and understood what his youngest son had done to him. So he said, "Damned be Canaan. To his brothers he shall be the basest of slaves." And he said, "Praised be Adonai, God of Shem, and Canaan shall be a slave to him. For Japheth, God will make ample room. He shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be a slave to him." After the flood, Noah lived 350 years. The years of Noah's life came to 950, then he died.
Thank you so much. And Martin, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 10?
Martin?
Yes,
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi.
thank you.
These are the lines of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the sons of Noah. Sons were born to them after the flood. The descendants of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Mesheth, and Tiras. The descendants of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togara. The descendants of Javan, Elisha, and Tarish, and Kittim, and the Dodanim. From these, the maritime nations branched out. These are the descendants of Japheth, by their lands, each with their language, their clans, and their nations. The descendants of Ham, Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Ramah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan.
Thank you so much, Martin. Let me invite Justin, if you'd like to read from chapter 10, verse 8.
Thank you, Rabbi. And Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty man in the land. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babylon, and Eresh, and Akkad, and Calneh, in the land of Shinar. From that land emerged Ashur, and he built Nineveh, and Rehoboth, Ir, and Calah. And Rezin, between Nineveh and between Calah, that is the great city. And Mitzrayim begot the Ludim, and the Anamim, and the Lehabim, and the Naphtuhim, and the Pathrushim, and the Kasluchim, from whom the Philistines emerged, and the Kaphtorim. And Canaan begot Zidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Girgashites, and the Hivites, and the Arkites, and the Sinites, and the Arvadites, and the Zemarites, and the Hamathites, and afterwards the families of the Canaanites were scattered. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon, as you come to Gerar, until Gaza, as you come to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Adamah and Zeboyim, until Lesha. These are the sons of Ham, according to their families and their tongues, in their lands, in their nations.
Thank you so much, Justin. And David and Susan, would you pick up there at verse 21 of chapter 10?
Sons were born too to Shem, the father of all the sons of Eber, the older brother of Japheth. The sons of Shem, Elam and Ashur and Arpachshad and Lud and Aram. And the sons of Aram, Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. And Arpachshad begot Shelah, and Shelah begot Eber, and to Eber 2 sons were born. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was split apart, and his brother's name was Joktan. And Joktan begot Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hazarmaveth, and Jerah, and Hadaram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abamel, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Joab. All these were the sons of Joktan, and their settlements were from Mesha till you come to Sephar in the eastern highlands.
These are, pardon me, these are Shem's children by their families, by their languages, in their lands, by their nations. These are the families of Noach's children for their records in their nations, and the nations were dispersed from these in the earth after the flood. And it was, all the earth was one language and the same words. And it was when they were traveling from the east, and they found a valley of land in Shinar and lived there. And they said to one another, "Come on, let's make bricks and fire them." And they had brick for stone, and they had bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come on, let's build ourselves a city and a tower, and its top will be in the skies. And we'll make ourselves a name, or else we'll scatter over the face of all the earth." And Hashem went down to see the city and the tower and the children of humankind had built. And Hashem said, "Here, they're one people, and they have one language. And this is what they have begun to do. And now nothing that they'll scheme to do will be precluded from them. Come on, let's go down and babble their language so that one would understand another's language." And Hashem scattered them from there over the face of all the earth, and they stopped building the city. On account of this, its name was called Babylon, because Hashem babbled the language of all the earth there, and Hashem scattered them from there over the face of all the earth.
Thank you both so much. And Robert, would you like to read starting at verse 10 of chapter 11?
Yes, thank you. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 5 and 30 years and begat Salah. And Arphaxad lived after he begat Salah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years and begat Eber. And Salah lived after he begat Eber 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Eber lived 34 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived after he begat Peleg 430 years and begat sons and daughters. And Peleg lived 30 years and begat Reu. And Peleg lived after he begat Reu 209 years and begat sons and daughters. And Reu lived 32 years and begat Serug. And Reu lived after he begat Serug 207 years and begat sons and daughters.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. Let me invite Catherine. Would you like to read a little bit, starting at verse 22?
Thank you, Rabbi. When Serug had lived 30 years, he begot Nahor. After the birth of Nahor, Serug lived 200 years and begot sons and daughters. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he begot Terah. After the birth of Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and begot sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Now this is the line of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terah in Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram and Nahor took to themselves wives, the name of Abram's wife being Sarah, and that of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah came to 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
Thank you, and thank you all very much. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focused study. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to take it out now. And certainly this Torah portion is filled with all kinds of very distinct, dramatic moments. Of course, the flood, the incident with Noah and his sons. We have the building of the Tower of Babel, and we have this long list of all these ancestors. And so there's a lot here to look at in very distinct and separate parts. This year, when I was reading it and studying it, all of a sudden I had a sense of how much there is a continuation of this portion from the previous portion, that there's a similar message that's being conveyed here. And what that has to do with is the primary message that was conveyed and we discussed about from Parshat Bereshit is this notion about what is paradise all about? What is this Garden of Eden all about? And it's interesting that in the Jewish sacred literature, Eden is up front, and it is a place of departure. It's not, and it becomes reflected in ongoing ways in Jewish tradition and Jewish culture, that heaven is really not a goal to get to. It's really the point of departure in order to define what it is to be a human being. And some ways of looking at the Garden of Eden story is to see it as the trajectory of the human beings is vertical, that is, they fall. But another way to look at it is that the trajectory and the direction of the human beings from the Garden of Eden is not vertical, but it's horizontal. That it's a move outward. And in that sense, it's a progression rather than a decline. So I want to kind of pursue the extent to which there is a continuation of that message that to live with imperfection is not the environment that is appropriate for a human being. And so here we have this story of Noah. And I've in fact entitled this week's study session, The Spirituality of Imperfection. Well, we have in our Torah portion, we open up, in fact, with this verse. Noah was a righteous person. He was, and the Hebrew is tamim, in his age. So there's two components to this second part of that first verse. There's the word tamim, which I didn't translate here. And the word tamim is kind of up for negotiation as to what exactly it means to be tamim. And later in the book of Deuteronomy, it's going to be used again, and Rashi at that point is going to say, well, what tamim means is not perfect, it means wholehearted, or maybe simple-hearted. And then we have the second part of that sentence, which is, he was tamim in his age. And so that provokes a lot of commentary, a lot of discussion. Well, what does it mean he was tamim in his age? Does that mean he would not have been tamim in another age? And Rashi comments on that, in fact. He says, there are those among our rabbis who expound this word, tamim, in his age as a word of praise. And there are those who expound it as deprecation. So there's obviously a debate that we see within Midrash and within the Talmud about Noah would have been considered a wholehearted and righteous person in any age. And then a different point of view says, no, it was only because everyone around him was so terrible that he would have been considered wholehearted, pure, and righteous. So I'd like to take that second point of view and kind of develop it a little bit further, because I think that what we see within the Jewish tradition is this notion of evaluating ourselves and others contextually rather than absolutely. And I think when one reads the full body of Jewish tradition and rabbinic writings, that's the way the rabbinic tradition approaches human beings, to evaluate human beings not upon some abstract absolute standard, but always contextually within any given moment, within any given time, within the time of their own particular individual development, within the time of their social milieu. Well, here we have this character, Noach, who certainly is a very provocative character, because what's fascinating about Noah is that he doesn't speak. He doesn't speak from the moment God talks to him. He doesn't speak when God says, I'm going to destroy the earth. He doesn't speak when he says, I want you to build an ark. He doesn't speak throughout the flood itself. In fact, Noah does not challenge God. You sure you want to destroy the earth? He doesn't speak up and issue a warning to his neighbors saying, the earth is going to be destroyed. We better mend our ways, or perhaps more simply, you should build an ark too. And it's not until after the flood and Noah awakens from a drunken stupor that he first speaks. And the words that he speaks at that point are words of curse against his youngest son. Those are the first words out of Noah's mouth in our text. So here's a character that had this opportunity to save the world, perhaps, and didn't do so, who had an opportunity to provide his sons with kind of words of wisdom as they had grown up, and instead curses them. So how are we to look at Noah? So I looked at this within this continuation of the story of the Garden of Eden, and I thought, what we're really being presented here is this thoroughly imperfect character. And I think Torah, the way I was looking at this picture now, is that Torah is trying to re-emphasize again and again this notion about, and this is what it means to be human. What it means to be human is you don't live in a perfect world. And in fact, it is dangerous to try and become perfect, which is what Adam and Eve, in a sense, were trying to do. They were trying to gain all knowledge. They were trying to become like the perfect being that we read about in the story, which is represented by the figure God. So the message there seems to be to try to become perfect only ends in tragedy. And so one needs to accept one's imperfections, and that imperfection becomes the fertile ground within which one can develop and grow and find some sense of peace within this world that itself is so very fractured. So when I'm thinking about this notion about what does it mean to be an imperfect person? What does it mean to know that to live to be a human being is by definition and to live with imperfection? How do we do that? What guidance, what practice, what way can begin to help us live with that sense of imperfection and avoid the temptations of the Garden of Eden of wanting to be all-knowing, all-powerful? And so where I turn, in part, it's interesting that we have this character, Noach, who is the first person that we read of who becomes drunk. And so I turned to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so in number 2, I have a quote from the big book. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. The alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. First of all, we had to quit playing God. So that's where within Alcoholics Anonymous is this principle of just surrendering and accepting and turning oneself over, of, if in effect, giving up that drive to want to be controlling of oneself and one's environment, and the pursuit of whatever stimulant or other addiction we attach ourselves to try and medicate ourselves from the notion that we are fractured human beings, that we are full of fears and anxieties, and we medicate ourselves in an attempt just to try and gather as much control of our world as we can. And of course, we know that only leads to further lack of control. So there's a beautiful book I really recommend to everyone called The Spirituality of Imperfection by Ernest Kurt and Catherine Ketham. And they take a number of spiritual traditions, including the Jewish tradition, and point out the wisdom of accepting imperfection as being the ground zero from which one can begin to find true serenity and peace. And here's from their book. The spirituality of imperfection begins with the recognition that trying to be perfect is the most tragic human mistake. It is only by ceasing to play God, by coming to terms with errors and shortcomings, and by accepting the inability to control every aspect of their lives, that alcoholics or any human beings can find the peace and serenity that alcohol or other drugs or sex, money, material possessions, power or privilege promise, but never deliver. So the wisdom that's to be found in this acceptance of imperfection is, interestingly enough, also found deeply within our tradition. And if you turn over the study sheet, I'd like to share with you a quote from Rabbi Yaakov of Itzbika Radzin. Rabbi Yaakov was the son of Mordechai Yosef Lerner, who was early part of the, or one of the early great Hasidic leaders, and he founded a particular branch of Hasidism called the Ishbitzer dynasty. And so his son, Rabbi Yaakov, lived from about 1818 to about 1878. And here's what he wrote. The very purpose of creation was that all would be compelled to ask, who created all this? That all would know clearly that a supreme force in its goodness is sovereign of the world, and none would make a claim to autonomous power. To that end, God planted in each entity some lack, a fissure in its being, making them all incomplete. So here the Ishbitzer Rebbe is indicating that to have a sense of lack is actually a sacred gift, because it prevents us from that presumption of being totally in control of everything. As we become aware of what we lack, we get closer, if you will, to what it means to live a sacred life. And interestingly enough, we have a particular blessing that we recite at the end of a meal called the Borei Nefeshot, which is a blessing that's recited over food that's not made from grain or one of the 7 fruits of Israel. And it's here in both the Hebrew and the transliteration. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei nefeshot rabot vecheshronan al kol ma shebarata lechayot b'shem nefesh kol chai baruch chai chaolamim. In the translation, blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, creator of numerous living beings and their needs, for all the things you've created with which to sustain the soul of every living being. Blessed is the one who is the life of the worlds. So the word there that is translated here as needs is in the blessing Behesronan, which is from the Hebrew chaser, which means to lack or be diminished. So here, this blessing is giving thanks to God for having created beings with deficiencies. Well, why would we thank God for creating me with a deficiency? What's that to be grateful for? Well, in the context of what we've been saying, this notion about the spirituality of imperfections, that is where we begin to access what it means to be human, and consequently, what it means to access the divine. This is there's a beautiful line from Leonard Cohen. Cracks are where the light come in, right? So to have a sense of lack is to then to propel one another towards others. And Emmanuel Levinas will develop this further when he acknowledges, I am grateful that there is an other, because the other takes me outside of myself. The other connects me. And that connection ultimately is a spiritual as well as ethical encounter. And number 6 is from a teaching from the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim was one of the great rabbis at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. He lived about 1838 to 1933. And his name was Israel Meir HaKohen Kagan. And he's called the Chofetz Chaim based upon one of the great books that he wrote, which is basically on Lashon Hara, what it means to speak evil. And so Chofetz Chaim spent much of his writings on encouraging people just how to live a good life, how to practice a life that would be a life of mitzvot, that would open us up to doing good, and the doing good would have both an ethical dimension to it, and it would also have an internal transformational effect. And he said this, everything with a soul is in need, and that is a good thing. So to have a need to have a sense of longing. We mentioned that last time about the extent of how yearning and longing becomes this moment of propelling us on a journey, which has the capacity to end up with greater connection. That yearning becomes the embarkation point for reaching a sense of connection with others and with all of creation. In terms of our commentary, we conclude with a quote from Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a story that's told that he was, before he became sober, he was, an alcoholic and drunkard, and he was drinking with a friend of his, and Bill brought down a bottle of scotch and said, slugged some down and offered some to his friend. And his friend said, no, I'm not drinking anymore. I have found religion. And Bill said, well, to hell with religion, I'm going to keep drinking. And eventually what Bill Wilson discovered was religion can, in effect, be as much an obstacle to recovery, perhaps as a therapeutic pathway to recovery, to sobriety. But what Bill Wilson did say, well, not religion, but spirituality. That is, without the doctrine, but with the practice. Okay. And this is what Bill Wilson said. He said, we must find some spiritual basis for living, else we die. So I'd like to share with you, now if you turn back, I'd like to share with you this painting by Roy Lichtenstein. And Roy Lichtenstein was really one of the prime movers of the pop art movement, beginning in the mid-50s and really taking off in the 1960s. And one of the interesting things about pop art is that it really built upon popular art, both in terms of its images, which it took out of cartoons and TV and newspapers, and then also the actual media that they worked in and the techniques that they used, which they adopted from really that of graphic design, in industrial production, and of advertising. And so unlike the dominant art that preceded them, that of abstract expressionism, which was often quite tempestuous in its presentation, thick with paint and full of drama, pop artist was a kind of a cool medium and was flat in its application. And so it was kind of poking fun, if you will, at the abstract expressionists and presenting everyday images as being access points into something of meaning. And as I'm looking at Roy Lichtenstein's work in particular, I was thinking that there is this engagement between the perfection of this kind of advertising, graphic design work, and the processes that were used to achieve that, almost as if no human hand was involved. It was almost as if it was handed over to a printing press, and these things were printed out or silk screened out. And then there's the hand of the artist who is engaged, and there's this tension between this mechanical, almost industrial production of a graphic image and then the hand of the artist. So in particular, Roy Lichtenstein had a series of paintings, some of which were called perfect, some of which were called imperfect. And here is one of his imperfect paintings. And what he did with this imperfect painting was everything, almost everything, it looks perfect. The lines, how the colors, everything just seems so well ordered until you get onto the left-hand side of the canvas. And then there's a piece that actually extends beyond the borders of the frame and beyond the borders of the canvas. And Lichtenstein said, I'm playing with the notion that I made a mistake, that when I drafted all this out, I somehow misjudged where a certain line was going to go, and it went out beyond the border of the frame. And so he's playing with the notion about that perhaps he, in this perfectly designed piece, made a mistake. And for him, in this imperfect painting, he seems to be saying, error can be part of the creative process. So I think what we're seeing here from the very beginning of Torah is this teaching that we are imperfect beings. To make mistakes and to err, or as Lichtenstein put it in his own words, missing the mark, which is a term that we know from Yom Kippur, chet, missing the mark. That missing the mark is actually part of human development. And to try and avoid it only leads us into tragedy. And we have to accept the fact that we are imperfect, we're going to make mistakes, and that the making of mistakes can be part of our development, as long as we learn from them and we keep moving forward. So with that, I'd love to see and hear what else you may have seen and read and envisioned as part of encountering this week's Torah portion. Susan, David, and then Martin. Yeah.
So I loved your Torah teaching, and it opened up to me that God himself had acknowledged that what God had created was imperfect. And then that God also decided at first to destroy everything. And then realized that wasn't the way to go either. But I also was very struck by something else, and that was in last week's Torah portion, there was so much detail spent on the Garden of Eden. Like it was something that God created that was very special. And God went ahead and destroyed that without looking back. God maybe felt that wasn't the right way to go, but there wasn't any attempt to restore the Garden of Eden.
So let me just pick up on that and pick up on a comment that Kim has just typed into the chat. She said, well, does that mean that God could be imperfect too? And one of the things that we said last time was that in the Zohar and in Kabbalah, God is an product of creation. And so if creation itself is full of fracture, what does that mean about this character called God? Now in Kabbalah, and there is this notion that there's something that precedes, and that the true aspect of what we call the source of everything is nothing. And of course, if it's nothing, then it's kind of hard to define something, and if you can't define something, it's kind of hard to find a flaw in it because it's nothing. Okay, so thank you very much, both Kim and Susan, for bringing in these complex notions. David, did you want to share something?
Yeah, what I was struck about the Torah portion, it's not really me responding to your teaching, but what I was struck about the Torah portion is God decides he made a mistake, and that he was going to destroy all life. And then later he decides, and it tells why. The world had become corrupt and violent. Human beings and maybe everything had become, this experiment he'd started had turned into this violent chaos. And then after the flood, he decides, he self-reflected and said, I'm not going to do that anymore. But he doesn't say why at all.
Yeah. So David, what you got me to thinking about was that we read this book, hopefully with the sense that, yes, these are interesting stories and interesting characters. And then at some point, we realize, oh, I'm not reading about somebody else, I'm reading about me. That these are stories that are happening inside of me. And so even this character that we call God, as well as these characters we call Noah and Jacob and Moses and David, they're also within us. They're aspects of ourselves. So the notion about to create something, imagine an artist. How many artists are there that create something and then they want to destroy it and they want to rip it up, and then, or maybe they will start all over again. So these are all dynamics that are happening within us. So let me call upon Martin and then Justin.
Thank you. Want to expand on both of what David and Susan have said and what Rabbi has said. First, I understand that probably these stories are not to be taken literally, that they're to be understood metaphorically. And there is an interesting precedent. We know through archaeology that there was a flood story that's very similar that comes from Mesopotamia that was written on cuneiform, and we have it available. So this is a story that in some ways went through many cultures. So there's a similarity. There's this interesting paradox that you have described between being lawful and lawless, or between being, acting nobly and acting in some ways wrong. One of the first things that this portion says, and incidentally, David was talking about how they kill people in this, it doesn't say that. All it says in Genesis is that the people were lawlessness. At least my translation says that the people were lawlessness, which raises this interesting question: who gave them the law? I mean, up to now, we have almost no law. We just have don't eat from the tree of life. There is law. So, and how did they disseminate it? Because they don't have any writing at this point in time. Although the people who actually wrote this may not have known that. So, it's sort of odd that he's going to destroy almost everything in the world, and yet how would they even know what is right? So it's not clear. It really creates an interesting sort of paradox. Then God only says that Noah was righteous and nobody else. So, but he saved other people associated with Noah. So now we have an interesting concept of virtue by association.
I like that.
Because after all, it's not clear they did anything right at all, other than that they were in Noah's family. So that's kind of odd. And that's the difference between life and death, association.
But then the trick is to find that virtuous person.
No, I don't think that's right. There hardly are very many virtuous people. Then there's this interesting question: all beings have value. That's why God created them. But God killed all the creatures, even though there's no indication there was anything wrong with them at all.
They don't follow a law. So why did he have to kill all the animals and every creeping thing? It's not clear at all why he needed to do that. He could have just sent a virus out or a plague and just killed the people and inoculated the righteous ones. But he didn't do that. He started from scratch. So it sounds like he wanted things to be perfect. And you have, again, that dynamic between perfection and imperfection that might be played out in the godhood as well. One of the most interesting things I find is that religion, in many ways, from my perspective as a psychologist, is man's attempt to control the world and potentially to control God. You may not recognize that, but I see that. And you have this very curious thing in this part, this section, where God destroys virtually the whole world. And what does Noah do? He burns a sacrifice. And the smell is so pleasing to the Almighty, to the creator of the universe, that he says, I'll never do that again. So now, in addition to having a jealous God, we have an olfactory God. And the main way to control him is with smell. And that's exactly what happens in the temple. They burn all these sacrifices. Why do you have to burn living, animals? It's to control God. So this is the precedent for our understanding of the olfactory God. And then a last question I have is, I couldn't understand at all what the business was about Noah getting drunk. First of all, you rushed to the conclusion that he was an alcoholic. There's no indication he was an alcoholic. He had wine once. Maybe he was celebrating. So all that about being an alcoholic is not clear at all he was. But what did Canaan do to be cursed by Noah? It seemed like he did everything right. He didn't look at his nakedness, not that that's such a horrible thing, and he covered him. And because of that, Noah's furious and curses him. What did he do?
Yeah. Yeah, just to clarify that point. So there were two sons that did try to avoid looking at their father's nakedness, but then the youngest one failed to do that. He did look at the father's nakedness, and that's what.
Big deal.
Yeah. Okay.
They're all men. I mean, what's the big deal?
Okay. All right. So let me call upon Justin, and then Paul, Robert, and Catherine.
And Richard.
Yeah. And Richard. Thank you.
I too am truly held, and this is why, and Mark has kindly asked me before what makes me so terrified by Torah, but I look at Genesis 9:25 as being a moment of complete terror. I mean, Irat Hashem. So just looking a little bit in the Midrash, it says here that Rabbi Huna said in Rabbi Yosef's name that Noah declared, "You've prevented me from begetting a fourth son. Therefore, I curse you, your fourth son." Joseph's name, let's see, Rabbi Yosef's name, he said, "You've prevented me from doing something that is done in the dark. Therefore, your seed will be ugly and dark-skinned." I mean, it's really amazing to see this. I mean, again, it's just a moment where there's such a splitting and a division. I mean, but that's part of the nature of this from Cain and Abel, and throughout this is just this incredibly terrifying division. I mean, and I suppose that's it to me, is that that the Torah presents total fear of Hashem. It's fear, and that the discourse, the bear that goes around it brings the humanity back, and the living, the chai of the people comes in at that point. But it's utterly terrifying.
So, and I like the way you ended that about it's the reading. So the reading, in effect, has the potential for being a therapeutic exercise that has the capacity to transform a terrifying text into something that, if we internalize it, we have the capacity to use it therapeutically, as opposed to if we just allow it to stand outside of us, then it becomes just pure terrifying element of the universe. So I thank you for kind of introducing all those notions. Let me get to Paul and Robert, Catherine, and Richard. Yeah.
Okay, what I was just I was about to say something, but then Martin turned me around again, because what I was saying, for the whole past year, my role has been looking at the text of the Bible, and I was saying that, well, maybe Abraham, our father, wasn't such a nice guy considering what he's doing to his son, or that Jacob, Jacob was doing to Joseph, setting him on his brothers and so forth, and what happened. So the Bible, if you get into the text, it's pretty bad. And then last week, I even got after God. I was saying, he set a trap up for Eve, and then all these women have, pains in birth and so forth. And so I started saying to myself, boy, I really am an anomaly in this group. But then I read your second paragraph in what you wrote, Rabbi, and then I feel it was addressed to me. And I'm sorry that the other people read it. But anyway, I felt it was addressed to me because I was doing essentially what Martin was doing, where essentially the heroes, it's easy to see past that maybe these heroes have shortcomings. And so before Martin gave his discussion, I was all set to say, you know what? There is something that this group offers. It has to do with the poets and the philosophers and the artists, what they have to say, that, it's enlightening and is completely what I missed in my earlier studies in life. And so, but then Martin shows up, and I'm back in the old self challenging. Did you notice this? Did you notice that? But apparently the Rabbi Moskowitz did notice all these things and has since gone on from that point onwards.
Paul, so I'm glad that you bring all of yourselves to our discussion, right? Both your old self, your new self, your evolving self, your intermediate self, and that just makes it just ever richer, right, for the conversation. So let me invite Robert, Catherine, and then Richard.
Yes, thank you again. An interesting and delightful discussion. So the human reality has form and an inner reality we call the soul. I would offer that we would not attribute any of this to a thoughtful person or a sane man. And therefore, I would offer that the Torah, the portion we've been reading, has spiritual symbolic meaning that has to be interpreted for the soul in such a way that it raises our reality towards goodness. Taken literally, we wouldn't ascribe it to a child. Also, when we and I honor the Torah and the Baha'i writings, we consider it, book of God for that time. So it's not a matter of disrespect at all. It's a matter of understanding. But when a child is young, we say emphatically, 2 from 1 is 0, but in an absolute way. The next year or two later, 2 from 1 is -1. It was 100 years ago that we came up with quantum mechanics. I heard on World Science Festival some months ago, one of the world-class scientists saying that we don't know what science we're going to be using in 50 years, and already it's morphed into quantum field theory. So what I'm saying is, we speak in language that people can hear. And if I lived in the days of Noah, my understanding would be very different. But living today, I can look at the ark, Adam and Eve, in symbolic ways that make me a better person. And so that's how I view it, not literally. And if some of it is true literally, I mean, we know God created all things. I take that quite literally. But to ascribe imperfection to God is to say he's not God. Because God, by definition, as I understand it, is an unknowable essence that we can't even begin to visually or dimly understand or visualize. In fact, the very attributes we ascribe to God, goodness, kindness, my understanding is that even those are at our level, not at his oneness, because his oneness towers is beyond any of those attributes. I think it's an absolutely marvelous portion that we've read, and I thank you all for such a rich discussion, and thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Robert. And let me invite Catherine, and then Richard will add to it.
Yes, this is a really minor point in the scope of the discussion, but I was thinking about Noah's silence and the fact that he doesn't speak, and how important that is for him to develop other forms of communication that he needs to tend to the animals. In other words, he needs to develop this nonverbal communication of intuiting the needs of the animals. And the sending forth of the dove is a gesture that in that, along those lines of that communication. And how difficult it must have been to recover from that, to go back to a world in which people are speaking again and interacting again.
Catherine, well, I just jump in here. My feeling is he was a man, contrary to Martin, he was a man of the grape. Who else could survive? You know, when you think about, you know, how many animals and the poop and the newspapers you have to put underneath there, you have to be, you can't be, you know, sober. You don't make it through those 40 days and 40 and whatever. So that's my interpretation.
So one point, and then I'll call upon Richard about Catherine brings up the issue of language. It's so fascinating the role that language plays in just the two Torah portions that we've been reading. You know, language brings things into existence, and then language is absent during this catastrophe called the flood, and then it reappears, and it is shattering within the family framework because of how it's used. And then language becomes a central point in the story of the Tower of Babel, where everyone is speaking the same language. You would think that would be a good thing. But in that case, speaking the same language has a regressive quality for human development, because it is symbolic of a gathering together, a retreat from the world, rather than an expansion out into the world. And so it's just, Catherine, thank you for reminding us this role that language is playing in many different ways, just in these two Torah portions. So let me call upon Richard, and then I'll get to Dave and Mark.
Just four very short points. One is, to err is human, to forgive is divine. And when we are ourselves, we have to learn to give a little divine forgiveness to ourselves so we can move forward. But and then 8:22, God says, so long as the earth endures, I will not again take all the life. And let me think, wait a minute. So long as the earth endures, God is saying that? So long as the earth endures, that just strikes me as, what is he saying? Is there another power that would cause it to endure or not endure other than his actions? And would that be our actions? No more water the fire next time? I don't know, but it is an interesting statement that God makes. And then the other thing is that last night, this goes to Noah and his age. And is it in any age? Is it in that age? And last night, I picked up the Union Prayer Book and opened it at random, my mother's prayer book, and read that the most important thing for humankind is to trust God. And I thought, well, maybe the age that it's referring to is his doddering, his old age. He's able simply to trust God. Do this, doing it. Not going to argue, not going to do anything. I'm with you to do this. I'm your instrument and I'll do it. And I've got to talk to the animals after all. And that it is, and at that juncture, he is the right chosen man, because at his age, at that context, he's going to do without asking a bunch of stupid questions and challenging God. That's not his job right then. And that's what God needed right then. Later, he got drunk and stuff happened. And I also want to say here that my hero, since the last portion, has always been Cain. And this is Cain's descendant. And Cain, yeah, he did a very bad thing, but what did he do next? He masked himself. He made sure God could not see him. He hid from God because he didn't want God to be offended by seeing him and reminded of what he'd done. He did it out of loyalty to God. And Noah is acting the same way here. He's not talking back. He's not challenging. He's trusting God. This needs to be done at this juncture.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you so
I
much.
don't know what the laughter was about, but I hope
Yeah.
it's entertaining.
Yeah. Let me call upon Dave, then Steve, and then I'll get to Mark. Okay. So Dave, go ahead, Dave Leb.
Okay, first thing I want to build upon what I think it was Martin said, that how can people be lawless when there were no laws at that time? But on the other hand, things must have been pretty good at that time too, because look how long people lived. They lived 400 years, 500 years. It really must have been pretty good though, even though they were lawless. And of course, after I guess God didn't like this, you know, and he made the flood. But this is the setup for the rest of our Tanakh, where God decided, well, people have to live by laws to do anything. So he made the whole shtick, starting with Adam, and presented humans with the laws to live by. Last thing I wanted to say is right in the beginning of the Torah, I think the first thing was, and God said, let there be light. And to me, the word said is probably the most important, probably the most important word in the Torah, because it indicates an attribute that only humans have. With our voice box, we can make more different sounds than any other animal in the world. And that turns into speech, and complex speech, that is. People will say animals have a language. They don't really have an language. It's very limited. It's not near as complex as human speech. And once again, that's one of the things that differentiate us from most of the other animals, complex speech.
Thank you, Dave. And let me call upon Steve and then Mark. Thank you again, Dave.
Sure.
Oh, I wondered whether anybody knows about the book Worlds in Collision by Velikovsky, where apparently other societies experience floods too, and there's all kinds of stories in their societies, like China and India, South America.
Josephus takes it up too.
Yeah. So
And then the other thing is, recently I saw on National Geographic, in Babylon they discovered trigonometric tables, so they think geometry might have been known to the Babylonians 2,000 years before the Greeks.
fascinating. Thank you, Steve. And then Mark Thompson.
First, I have to say thank you, Rabbi, for allowing us to extend our conversation beyond our normal time. It's been just a really fascinating discussion tonight. And as most of you know by now, I love to look at some of the Hebrew words and to see how they kind of relate and sometimes offer contradictions. So the first word I'm thinking of is the word for flood. And the word for flood in Hebrew is mabul, which also means confusion. And this story is all about the flood and the confusion. The second word is Noah. Noah is Noach in Hebrew, which means calm. So although Noah may not have been a man of many words, he obviously was able to do something correctly because he was calm enough to bring all those animals together and try to save at least a portion of the world so that it could exist in the future. And the third word is the word for ark. The word for ark in Hebrew is teva. Teva also means word. And it occurs to me that as we talk, we, with our words, are really kind of providing an ark for ourselves, sort of a place of respite, of refuge from some of the craziness in the world. So I just want to thank everyone for allowing us to have these words so that we can try to make sense of what might even be terrifying for some. Certainly, it's provocative. And finally, the last word is Tom. And this is sort of a personal story because my father's name is Tom, or was Tom, or Tommy. And when I was in Israel, I was thinking of changing my last name from Thompson to Bartom, Bar meaning son, son of Tom. And I actually went to my father one time and I said, Dad, would you mind if I Hebraicize our last name and make it not Thompson, but Bartom? He didn't really like that idea too much. And so I think our discussion tonight kind of helps me understand that maybe it was the right decision not to do that, because Tom can have many different meanings, some of which are not too favorable. So that's all I have to say tonight.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I want to thank everyone. What a rich discussion it has been. And what you all got me to think about through the discussion is that where Torah begins in these early portions is the recognition that a primary aspect of what it means to exist is to be separated. That separation is a primary component of existence. And to be separated means that one is no longer complete or whole. One is imperfect. And how we respond to that awareness can lead in many different directions. One can lead to the direction of seeking to assert control over one's environment. It can result in trying to anesthetize oneself from the awareness of being separated and fractured, or it can take us in the direction of embracing the separation as being not a source of pain, but a source of attachment, that yearning to now be compassionately attached to others and to all of creation. And I think that is what Torah here is presenting to us. It's an acknowledgement that to exist is to be separated, but that the separation can be a pathway back to some kind of wholeness if we engage in the practice and the appreciation that to avoid trying to control, to avoid trying to hide from the rest of the world, which is what was happening in the Tower of Babel, and to engage in this long journey of many different dips and rises and dips and rises, that's the only way to gain some sense of grace out of this reality that we are individuated, separated, and imperfect. But to be separated, individuated, and imperfect does not mean that we can't be whole. We seek wholeness through compassion and love and attachment. And that goes not just for our relationships with others, it also has to do with the relationship with this text that we're reading. Because we can read it with a great deal of detachment, as if this is not about me. And then we can become easily judgmental and cynical about what we're reading. Or we can read it with a sense of grace and love and compassion. And if we do that, if we read it with a sense of attachment with this text, then we can develop an entirely new relationship with this material, and consequently with the source of this material, which is the pathway to wholeness. Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
This is an add-on, and I've been puzzling all night over this, and I think you just helped me get the picture of something. There are two words for nakedness in Torah. The first one in Genesis 2, verse 25 is arumim, which means unclothed or naked. But the word for naked here, that Noah being naked, is erva, which it's different from that other word naked. It has sexual connotations. So it's a different kind of nakedness. And I'm trying to figure out what it is. The picture I get is of Noah bringing all the animals 2 by 2, his wife, his sons, their wives. There's 2 by 2 for everything, right? There's the other. And what happened if you're lying naked in your tent and you're having some kind of sexual nakedness? It doesn't say his wife is in the tent with him, right? Okay, I'm seeing a man laying on his back with a sexual nakedness, and I'm seeing the other sons coming and covering over it. It seems to me that the problem there is, where was his wife when he was sexually naked? We're missing that piece, right?
Interesting.
And now I'm going to think about the whole thing all week long.
Okay.
And if anyone has any thoughts about that, I'd like to hear about them.
Thank you. I hadn't thought about that
You're
at all.
You're
So thank
talking
you.
about the other and making
Thank
things
you.
whole and stuff. Here in the middle of this story, and the Tower of Babel, what is that? Right? We try to make a name for ourselves, but he needed to make 2 names. He needed his name and his wife's name.
So yes, the pre-epic nature of the Tower of Babel. So, and then let me just bring it back real quickly to Roy Lichtenstein and his imperfect painting, because traditional fine art had as its highest value the replication of perfect forms, and then the Impressionists came along and they overthrow that. But here is what Roy Lichtenstein is trying to tell us in this imperfect painting, which is, yes, you can have a perfect painting, which he also did, in which everything is in order and well confined within the borders. But you can also have an imperfect painting, which is no less a creative and artistic work of art as well. And the mere fact that a piece juts out beyond the perfect frame of the borders doesn't mean that it's not also beautiful. And I think that's what Roy Lichtenstein here is trying to convey, is that the act of imperfection, of going beyond the constraints of the framework, literally, can be an act of creation, a work of art, and a work of beauty. And that indeed, I think, is our task, is to embrace our imperfections, to embrace the notion of separation, not as a source of agony and pain and mistake, but as an avenue for greater compassion, greater grace, and greater love, and greater attachment. I'm so glad to be attached to all of you. Together, you enrich me so much with the understanding and a deepening of not only my attachment to this text, but of all of you. I'm so grateful for that. Look forward to our next gathering. God bless you all and be well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Much
Thank you,
love.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.